Thanks for joining us on Chicago Tonight. I'm Paris Schutz. Here's what we're looking at.
Stop the political posturing.
An alderman's role as committee chair is in jeopardy. Heather Cherone joins us live from City Hall with the latest. An update on the CTA's reliance on bus and train operator overtime and chronically delayed records requests. The Bears say they want to stay in Chicago. We dig into the debate over what that would look like. And behind the scenes of Mayor Lori Lightfoot's tumultuous 4-year tenure. And now to some of today's top stories. The Democratic nominee for Cook County State's Attorney held an official victory news conference today. Eileen O'Neill Burke was declared the winner in the primary on Friday in a close race with Clayton Harris. That was a race that took 10 days of counting for the unofficial call to be made. O'Neill Burke says it was a desire for law and order throughout the county that propelled her supporters.
People told me everywhere they want to be able to go out at night and not be worried. They want to ride on a safe public transportation system. People want illegal guns and assault weapons off of our streets. Those are all things we all want.
O'Neill Burke will face Republican Bob Fioretti and Libertarian Andrew Charles Kopinski in the general election. Governor J.B. Pritzker today weighed in on 25th Ward Alderman Byron Sigcho Lopez after Lopez spoke at a rally where an American flag was burned. The governor signals his opposition to Sigcho Lopez's conduct, but stopped short of saying he should be reprimanded for it. This after Lopez spoke at a rally for Gaza last week, condemning President Joe Biden and the DNC.
Calling the president, names, saying that we shouldn't have the Democratic National Convention in Chicago, attacking or at least standing in front of a burned American flag and in front of a sign, essentially referring to people as if they're in favor of genocide, who clearly are not, I think are all things that I disagree with. But I will defend to the death his right to say those things.
And coming up, we'll have details on an effort to strip Alderman Sigcho Lopez of his committee chair position. Cubs fans are happy tonight, if not chilly and soaked after a triumphant home opener. Third baseman Christopher Morel hit an RBI single here that turned into a de facto inside the park home run as he, Ian Happ, and Seiya Suzuki all scored thanks to multiple errors from Rockies left fielder Nolan Jones. Look at the missed throw there. There goes Morel home inside the Parker, although I don't think he gets credit for all those RBIs. Those are unearned runs. But the Cubs win 5-0 nonetheless. Meanwhile, the White Sox are still 0 for the season, dropping to 0-4 thanks to a 9-0 loss to the Atlanta Braves. Might be a tough year on the South Side. Up next, a city council effort to punish one of its own fails. That's right after this.
Chicago Tonight is made possible in part by the Alexandra and John Nichols family, the Jim and Kay Mabey family, the Polk Brothers Foundation, and the support of these donors.
Chicago City Council members vote 29-16 to reject an effort to punish one of their own for speaking at a protest where an American flag was burned. The vote came after a fiery debate. Here's Alderman Byron Sigcho Lopez responding to the attempt to remove him as chair of Council's Housing Committee.
This is an opportunity for the council to start doing the business of the city of Chicago, or continue to pander. I think some of my colleagues need to have maybe a lesson of what First Amendment rights mean. I challenge us today to stop the political posturing, to stop the divisions that stop us from doing the work.
And reporter Heather Cherone joins us now from City Hall. So Heather, tell us about that March 23rd protest that's the heart of this controversy.
Well, several groups deeply unhappy with the way President Joe Biden is handling the war in Gaza, wants the Democratic National Convention not to be held in Chicago after all. And this protest was really designed to encourage people to come out and protest and really sort of lay into President Joe Biden's conduct of supporting Israel. Speaking at that protest was a veteran, Zachary Kam, who served in Afghanistan with the Marines. He spoke and in protest burned a flag he said he brought with him from Afghanistan in protest of the American government's policy. After Kam spoke and after he burned the flags, Alderman Sigcho Lopez stood in front of it and then delivered. Today at the City Council meeting, Zachary Kam asked to speak to the City Council. He was denied. He did not sign up and win a lottery spot to address the City Council. But there were plenty of people who shouted out in support of him and in support of Byron Sigcho Lopez, even though others called him a traitor and called for him to be removed from the country.
And then we have some video here of Mr. Kam presumably being taken out of City Council. Why did the effort to punish Sigcho Lopez fail?
Well, I think there was a little bit of concern that there were shifting explanations about why Alderman Sigcho Lopez should be punished. First, there were allegations that was really fueled on X, the social media site once known as Twitter, that he had burned the flag. And then it was inappropriate that he was there at the protest. And then it was unacceptable, some Alder people said, that he was even associated with this group that is calling for the Democratic National Convention not to take place in Chicago, and calling President Biden, quote, Genocide Joe. So that didn't go over well with the majority of Alder people who seemed frustrated that this took up an entire afternoon without any real clear example of sort of what they were trying to accomplish, except exposing deep continuing divisions over the war in Israel and Gaza.
And deep continuing divisions on City Council right now. Where does this leave relationships among City Council members?
Well, there was a lot of laughter when Alderman Maria Haddon stood up and asked her colleagues to stop posting on Twitter, to think twice before calling each other names such as fascists and communists and socialists. It's clear, though, that this has really reached a breaking point, and it's not clear whether the people who are on opposite sides of these issues can really work together for the business of the city.
Clear dividing lines here. Heather Sharon, thanks very much.
Thanks, Paris.
You bet. And you can read Heather's full story on our website. It's all at WTTW.com/news. And we're back with more right after this. The Chicago Transit Authority has corrected years' worth of records it provided to WTTW News after the agency discovered it had not given an accurate accounting of bus and train operators' work hours. That news came just hours after a story about the CTA's chronically delayed public records requests, delays that a transit advocate was able to demonstrate through an analysis of FOIA response times. WTTW News reporter Nick Blumberg joins us now with more. Nick, fill us in on the background here.
Well, Paris, for the last couple years, we've been reporting on the long hours that some CTA bus and train operators put in. In January, we filed a public records request for 2023 numbers under the state's Freedom of Information Act. Now, the initial batch of records had errors in it, which the CTA itself caught and flagged for us. But 2 weeks went by without them providing the corrected records. Now, public bodies in Illinois, as you know, generally have to respond to FOIA requests within 10 business days, a deadline the CTA regularly misses, and that, as you mentioned, we reported on. When we received the corrected batch of operator hours, they came with a big caveat. Now, CTA operators earn time and a half for overtime. For the last 2 years, the CTA told us the records it was providing WTTW News were just a straight time accounting of work hours. But the agency discovered that was wrong, and the records did in fact contain the overtime multiplier, even though the CTA told us multiple times that it did not.
And what effect does that have on the records?
Well, as you can imagine, it made the average work weeks for bus and train operators appear artificially longer. The CTA was able to provide us corrected records for 2015 through 2023 last week that only cover time on the job with no overtime multiplier. They still show long average weeks for certain operators and the shrinking pool of employees who keep buses and trains running. Now, in 2015, 51.6% of operators worked an average of 30 to 40 hours a week. That cohort shrank to 34.8% last year. In 2015, just 2 employees worked an average of 60 hours or more each week. In 2022, that peaked at 39 operators. Now, keep in mind, these are total yearly hours divided by 52. They don't include vacation or time off. So some actual work weeks were even longer, raising concerns, of course, about health, safety, and burnout.
And you mentioned the delayed FOIA responses, so what have we learned about that?
Well, after our story last month on the delays, we heard from a local public transit advocate, Nick Hunter. He obtained data on the CTA's response time for Freedom of Information Act requests during 2023. Between January and November of last year, just 94 out of 880 requests were completed within the 10-day timeline set out in state law. He also found that businesses like law firms and insurance companies got the fastest responses. Now, the CTA told both us and Hunter that it's committed to responding within the legal time frame and is pursuing options to supplement its FOIA office staff with contract employees. The FOIA response log Hunter obtained still shows more than 200 unfulfilled requests.
All right, Nick, a lot of confusion there. Thanks very much.
Thank you.
And you can read Nick's full story on our website. It's all at WTTW.com/news. Mayor Johnson has signaled support for public investment around a potential new Bears Dome stadium on the lakefront. And while they haven't yet released plans, the team's president stated they would commit over $2 billion to transform Museum Campus and revamp the surrounding infrastructure, all of which Warren hopes could begin as soon as this year. But the group Friends of the Parks is playing defense as the building would seem to violate the Lakefront Protection Ordinance. And joining us are Jen Kilgore, Interim Executive Director of Friends of the Parks, and State Representative Cam Buckner, whose district includes Soldier Field and the area surrounding it. Thank you both for joining us here. Representative Buckner, you've been in contact with the Bears throughout this whole process. The team president, Kevin Warren, says they want to have plans and renderings out soon. How soon will those come out, and what do you think they're going to look like?
Harris, I imagine we're going to see those plans relatively quickly. We are now heading back to Springfield tomorrow to really ramp up our session, and I know that they want to have conversations with the General Assembly, and so I expect that we'll see something from the Bears in a concrete fashion in very short order. I'm looking forward to seeing those. I hope that those plans are intentional, that they are forward-leaning, and that we can have a full-on conversation with the people of Illinois and the people of Chicago about what they mean, not just for today, but for the future.
Jen Kilgore, you had a conversation with the Bears. You have come out in opposition to this plan, although you stopped short of saying you're definitely going to sue. What was your meeting like?
It was a great meeting. It was wonderful to, first of all, just have a chance to meet Kevin Warren and see his enthusiasm for the city. We would love to see the Bears stay in Chicago. We have no complaints about that. We're listening and wanting to learn more. And I love what the representative said, like, yes, conversations are needed, right? And we reiterated our core values, which are not just our values, or Chicago's values, of having an open, clear, and free lakefront that is for public use.
Right, the Lakefront Protection Ordinance. So if they built a dome at that parking lot site, would that violate the Lakefront Protection Ordinance in your mind?
Well, it's not just the Lakefront Protection Ordinance, it's also the Public Trust Doctrine, which basically challenges private development on area of land east of Lakeshore Drive. But I want to bring this back a little bit and say, I feel like this whole conversation, we feel this whole conversation is being really, really rushed. And it reminds me of those commercials, those late night commercials, that say, buy now, this deal will not last long. And if you act now, we'll throw in something extra. For example, Friends of the Parks, we love it when people talk about increasing the numbers of public restrooms. Mm-hmm. And like, hey, that would be great.
Or increasing park space.
Well, of course, yeah. 20% more park. I was joking in the meeting. So I feel like a kid in a candy shop.
Because they're proposing more park space.
So many interesting ideas on the table. And then I said, wait a second. We said, wait a second.
You got to discuss all these.
where are the details?
All right, well, Representative Buckner, some of the details here are, amenities around the stadium, housing, businesses, perhaps entertainment, but where would that go if you're technically not supposed to build private development on the lakefront?
That's why we've got to hear more from the Bears about what their desire is. The only way that any of this works is with two things. It's with sunlight and scrutiny, right? The people have to hear what this plan is. And obviously, Jen talked a lot about the Lakefront Protection Ordinance and the Public Trust Doctrine, and the spirit of these things are strong, and we got to keep that in mind. I've said this before, and I'll say it again, Paris, that the work that Friends of the Park are doing here is not just noble, but it's necessary. And so we have to really pay attention to that. But also, if we're talking about more than the stadium, if we're talking about hotels and restaurants, where else can that go? I've heard a lot of talk recently about the Bronzeville Lakefront. I know that there has been an editorial in one of the Chicago dailies about it. I'm a Bronzevillian. I think that I like those ideas too. I want to hear more about the economic impact and what that could mean for this project.
Jen Kilgore, what about the fact that Representative Buckner has advocated for this being a publicly owned stadium? Would that make it comply with the Public Trust Ordinance?
We are not prepared to say what will comply or not comply. Would a dome stadium? It's very hard to imagine a proposal like this. Although again, it's very vague so far. Being consistent with how our lakefront has been preserved. I mean, our lakefront is the crown jewel of Chicago. If people had not taken very unpopular opinions for hundreds of years at this point, we would not be having this conversation because the lakefront would be already developed. And what is troubling is that sometimes it feels that people come in, power brokers, billionaires think, well, maybe the rules don't quite apply to us. And so we're really interested, again, and I love the word.
George Lucas certainly learned that lesson.
Yes, indeed. I love the word scrutinize. We're saying slow down, we need a lot of stakeholders, and we need to scrutinize. And instead of just being so focused on this one spot, let's use our creativity to, where are some of the other locations? What other ways can we achieve this goal? This is an exciting opportunity to talk about what does it mean to have our lakefront? How do we protect it? Where else is community development needed? And
I think you've brought up the possibility of the Michael Reese site. So what about that, the former Michael Reese Hospital? What about that, Representative Buckner? Is that a plan that you might entertain or lawmakers might entertain, the old Michael Reese Hospital site?
Because I've been very clear about the fact that I want the Bears to stay in Chicago. And there's a footprint there that is adjacent to where they currently are that could make sense. And that includes the old Michael Reese site, or as we call it now, the Bronzeville Lakefront, which I mentioned earlier. I think looking at that as a anchor to the near south side, and also as a gateway to the downtown central business district is very interesting to me. Once again, as a Bronzeville resident, I'm intrigued by that. But listen, the great thing is that we have some options here. And one thing that is very clear is that, as Jen said, this cannot just be about the next football season or the next Super Bowl. This has to be about the next generation. We have to make sure that we're doing the right things in this space.
Well, we hope to see those plans really soon. And Representative Buckner and Jen Kilgore, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you.
And up next, an in-depth look at former Mayor Lightfoot's leadership during an unprecedented time. So stay with us. 5 years ago, former Mayor Lori Lightfoot became the first black gay woman to be elected mayor of Chicago, but it wasn't long before a host of challenges rose to the surface during her time in office. The COVID-19 pandemic, rising crime, and the racial justice protests following the murder of George Floyd. A new book offers a behind-the-scenes look into Lightfoot's tumultuous single term in office. And joining us is Gregory Pratt, Chicago Tribune reporter and author of The City is Up for Grabs, How Chicago Mayor Lori Lightfoot Led and Lost a City in Crisis. This is a real page-turner, Greg Pratt. Congratulations on the book.
Thank you.
And I know you were watching that last interview as a veteran Chicago Tribune reporter you are now to see what's going to happen here. So the central question you posed here in the introduction of this book is, how did Lori Lightfoot go from political wonderkin, this rapid rise where she won every single ward in the runoff, to sulking her way out of City Hall? How did she?
It's fundamentally an inability to have political relationships and to work with people who you don't like. And it's not different than a normal office environment where maybe you don't like your manager, but that doesn't mean you tell them to go to heck every day. But or maybe you do, and then pretty soon.
None of that happens at the Tribune.
Or at WTTW. but you know, it's a thing in politics that she just couldn't transition. You know, I tell people it's adapt or die. And she was a prosecutor, and she couldn't get out of that mindset.
Well, it's talking about transitioning. The Lightfoot that campaigned was vastly different than the one who governed on so many issues, like the elected school board, police oversight. I mean, these were 180-degree turns. What accounted for her change of position on these things?
Well, it's remarkable. So there's on the elected school board, it's a great example. That was one of the first things Rahm Emanuel warned her about and told her when they had a meeting, you don't want this, because she had campaigned in favor of it. And she says, no, I don't. And, you know, Rahm...
Right. In the book, she says something like, I'm not for that, or something like that, even though she had campaigned on that.
And then when the elected school board happened, she didn't want to acknowledge that she had, when it was happening in Springfield, she didn't want to acknowledge that her position had changed. So she just kind of let the CTU and the legislators do their thing and then came up at the last minute and lost. And the issue was that she campaigned one way and governed another, as you point out. And that was partly because she was massaging some of her real positions to you know, compete with Tony Preckwinkle on some of these progressive issues, which is where Chicago, for the most part, is. But in truth, you know, she ran like a lefty, and she was a moderate like Rahm Emanuel. And you can't pretend to be Kevin Costner on date number 2 and 3. You can pretend to be Kevin Costner on date 1, Better Call Saul reference, but you get the point. I
got you there. You know, you have access to a ton of text messages and emails from the mayor. You did a lot of FOIAing to get those. A lot of like alarming, well, not alarming, but, you know, language that the mayor uses that kind of stands out, not just to her perceived enemies, but to her allies. Give me some examples of some like text messages or emails that she sent to people, staffers, other alder people, that were just kind of like eye-opening.
Well, I remember, and I tell this story in the book, that I get a phone call from a staffer that says, you need to FOIA this email. It's the craziest email I've ever seen in my life. And it's a thing where she was upset about quote unquote office time, which is the amount of time, which is time where she's just has free time to make phone calls, read, whatever. And she was in office time when she sent the email, and she sends the email and says, I need office time every day, I need office time every day, I need office time every day. Repeats it 16 times, and there's 5 sentences repeated like 70 times. Nobody wanted to work for that, right? And if you did that or I did that at work, we'd go to HR. You know, it's not a good email. And there was things like that, like Chris Taliaferro, the alderman, was concerned about looting and rioting during the George Floyd protests, and he says, you know, we need to do this, we need to do that, and she says, and he was an ally, and she says, I'm getting gunk for even trying to do anything. And, you know, that's at least in the heat of a crisis. But it was just her response to everything. I always liked the text message she sent Maria Haddon about the Columbus statue. She said, I don't take kindly to demands. And Maria had just said, this needs to come down. Can we talk?
Interesting. So, I mean, definite sort of way of doing business that was consistent here with the mayor. You know, we have to admit that she was throwing crises that no one could have predicted, worldwide pandemic, George Floyd riots. What does your sort of background reporting here tell you about how she managed these two crises?
So I think that on COVID, she and the governor had a lot of conflict, and we talk about this in the book. The governor wanted to do shutdowns and things of that sort, and she was against it. But she did the responsible adult thing of working together with Governor Pritzker to not show off a bunch of fighting like what happened with the governor of New York and New York City, de Blasio and Cuomo. So I think she deserves some respect for that. I think on policing and on the civil unrest, we kind of got the worst of both worlds, where they didn't really do the reforms that they promised, and you didn't really have the police department working aggressively. So you just kind of had a middling department all along, and that was really unfortunate.
Very quickly, another unfortunate decision, the hiring of the police chief, David Brown, who she really touted, she really wanted, but he didn't have a very successful tenure by any objective account.
No, and if she had fired him, she probably would have got reelected, because she couldn't explain to people what she was doing about crime. She had a absentee, a guy that I remember people used to say, well, he polls okay. His polling is, nobody even knows who he is, and that's a problem, because the police superintendent is the second most visible person in the city of Chicago at any given time, aside from whoever's losing games for the Bears.
There, exactly. Greg Pratt, there's so much more we could talk about with this, and we are going to talk about it at the University Club April 4th, Thursday. So there's a plug there. Greg's book comes out tomorrow. Again, it's called The City is Up for Grabs, How Chicago Mayor Lori Lightfoot Led and Lost a City in Crisis. Thanks, Greg. And that's our show for this Monday night. Be sure to join us tomorrow at 5:30 and 10. Our Spotlight Politics team unpacks Eileen O'Neill Burke's squeaker of a win and what it means for the general election. And two local World War II veterans reunite for the first time. There they are. And now for all of us here at Chicago Tonight, I'm Paris Schutz. Thank you for watching. Stay healthy and safe and dry tonight, and we'll see you tomorrow.
Closed captioning is made possible by Robert A. Clifford and Clifford Law Offices, a Chicago personal injury and wrongful death firm that is proud to recognize its 18 attorneys selected for the 2024 Super Lawyers List.